Macon, Florida, growing manufacturing in the Sunshine State.
Hi, Lisa.
Hey, good to see you
Hey,
again.
it's great to see you as well. It's really nice to have you, to host you here. Uh, so for those of you who don't know, Lisa is the CEO of RRiveter. It's really the first time we met with Lisa, that just the philosophy behind was fascinating to me. And we happened to work together too, uh, through our obviously Sama in Florida Makes network. Uh, It was a great project, and we'll talk more about that. But first and foremost, how about Lisa? You tell us a little bit about yourself and where the idea came, and then obviously tell our viewers what's our
Yeah,
Riveter is all about.
yeah, absolutely. I think to know where we've come such a long ways with the project we worked together, you really have to know the background of our Riveter and some of the unique sides of it to really understand just the mountain that we climbed and also to understand some of the early decisions that we made. So just to tell a little bit about myself and the company. So I grew up in a really rural area in Montana and was just surrounded by people that really could solve an issue with so little. So being not, you can't just go and hire somebody to fix the problem for you. So I just grew up with this mentality and the people around me that like you can solve a problem if you put your mind to it. And so when I met my husband and started, I met him and he was in the military. And so I very quickly married into the military. Didn't know what I was getting myself into by any means. Because out in Montana, there's not a lot of military. So being a new military spouse was an interesting concept to me. And I didn't realize that we'd be moving every 2 to 3 years. And I remember very early on, the Army was referring to spouses and children as dependents. And I was like, that's a strange word to refer to family members. But then after 4 or 5 moves, I really did start to feel dependent on him because I wasn't able to get work. The employers, and now being on the other side of being an employer, it's hard to hire somebody just to have them to move, and you put a lot of money and effort into training someone, and then just to have them move is very
Yeah,
difficult for that. For that,
especially back then, right? What time are we looking at?
yeah,
Because right
especially
now,
now.
lots of
Yeah,
remote
now,
work.
yeah, exactly. And get into that too about remote work and everything. But yeah, this was 2011 is when we started the company. And so we moved to yet another very rural location that was really difficult to find work. And I met another military spouse and she was having the same struggles that I was, that no one would hire you. They look at your resume, it's very fragmented, and being in a military area, they just assume you're a military spouse and they weren't going to give you that job. So I applied to hundreds of jobs at that point, and everyone
Must have been
looked at
frustrating.
it's
Yeah.
super frustrating. And so really our Riveter was birthed out of the idea of being able to support military spouses and be able to have remote work. At the time, there wasn't a lot of remote opportunities for work. The only real thing you could do from work from home was direct sales, where you had to leverage your friends and family in order to get them to buy into your sales model at
Yeah,
the
I
time.
remember those models.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that was really frustrating. We wanted to be able to have something that military spouses could rely on. And so came up with a business model really after I read a book by Frederick Smith, the founder of FedEx, about how the shipping model was very revolutionary, that he would send something in the exact opposite direction in order to make a hub, which was less expensive for the whole entire value chain of the business. And thought, let's create a distributive manufacturing model where we needed a product that had a lot of parts and pieces, and we could send out the parts to military spouses wherever the military moves them. They could create those pieces as long as it could be done on a home sewing machine, and they'd send it back to us, and we would create the product, finish the product. So that was in 2011 in an attic, and we didn't have a whole lot of money to put into the company. We both put $2,100 on a credit card to start the company, and a lot of that actually went into um, insulation for the attic because it was freezing and I was working in winter clothing or in snow clothing. And so a lot of the original money actually went into insulation for the attic. So this is 2011. We're making 7 products in a 2-week time frame. Not a lot of throughput on our
What type of products are those?
well, we had decided on handbags just because it had a lot of parts and
Handbags.
pieces.
Yeah.
But the first products we made, actually that job kit right behind me, it took us 2 weeks to hand stitch that. And we're like, this is never going to work. So that's when we went and got our first sewing machine that I'm sure Rosie the Riveter used. It was that old, but the only place we had was her attic. So we had to pulley system it up into the attic. through an attic ladder, and that was interesting. But yeah, that was the beginning. Very very modest, very basic roots of just starting from scratch, really with an idea of eventually being able to employ other military spouses with
Amazing.
this business model.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's interesting how you actually got the idea from FedEx,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
I would have never, I would
Never
have
thought.
never
Yeah.
guessed, never
Yeah.
guessed. Hey, if you don't mind, which one is the very first bag? You pointed it, but
So as you can even see that the stamps or the brand is even hand individual metal
yep.
stamp. And then she took half of it because it was literally with just a needle and thread. We were hand stitching this at the time. Uh, so it took us like literally 2 weeks to just one bag. We're like, this is not going to work. And this is hand dyed leather. I think the inside of it is not even finished. So I think that it was just taking so long we didn't even finish the inside. So that's how it all began. It's with one dot kit, and my husband used it for years. And I finally said I should probably put that in my office because it was the beginning of it all.
What a story! I love that.
Yeah, and so we started with that. It started 7 bags to make, sold those to make 20, 20 to make 50. And really, in the very beginning, we didn't even have enough money for raw materials. She had just visited one of those Army Navy stores that are kind of reselling old military products and saw a shelter half there. It's actually a military tent. The story behind it is that it's a half. Your buddy carries the other half to make a whole tent. So they call them shelter halves. And so we started producing everything. We cut everything with a. We went to Home Depot and got a piece of plastic that was 18 inches. Was never actually 18 inches. It's kind of like a 2x4. I don't know why we always called it the 18-inch square, but it never was. But we'd make these squares, and so all of our designs all came from just that one square. So a lot of our signature products that you see on our website are still those designs that we came up with in 2011 in an attic. And it was really just on the idea that if we could start with a square, you could fit 8 squares on shelter half. So that was kind of like the beginning of our production model was these.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so everything was made out of military materials in the beginning. And then that's when we brought on our first military spouses was that time frame. So our first military spouse came on and she would pick up the items and then drive it home and then could work from home with her kids. Then she'd drop them off at the end of the week. And that was our first remote, what we call our first remote riveter.
And
So
how did you find those riveters? I mean,
yeah, so it
what was
was
the
military
process for that?
spouses that we knew, other very disgruntled people that said that I can't get a job, I'm creative, I should be able to be employed. Um, and so we said, hey, come work for us. And so really started
So
with
you
our first,
market yourself somehow, or
in that very early time frame, it was mostly our friends that were also creative, our military spouse friends that could sew. And at the beginning, I sewed two until I sewed a pocket upside down, and the bag got returned by a customer and said, "I love my bag, but this pocket's upside down. It's not very functional." And my co-founder looked at me and said, "You're fired from sewing." So very early on, I got away from the more technical construction side and went over to the business side, which is where I really needed to be from the beginning. I was always more of the business side of the company. So I think I'm frozen. Are you frozen?
no? I'm good, and it's good you stopped because I'm hearing myself.
Oh, okay.
Is there a way you can?
Put in your butt in.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Yeah. One second. Let me.
Or there is an option that stop echo. If you look at the settings, let me pause it for a sec. Hey, so what about the name RRiveter? Can you tell our viewers a little more about that as well? I think it's a perfect name for what you're doing. But
Right, for sure. So we named the company after Rosie the Riveter. So she was the World War II icon that I think a lot of you see on a poster. Is kind of how most of us vision her, but the "We Can Do It" girl. And it really just meant a lot for us just because of the connection to the military. She wasn't necessarily a military spouse, but she was someone that wanted to do something for her country and not just stand on the sidelines when we really needed it. And so what I love about that era is that although women weren't in combat arms, they really did do a lot for that role, for that war. So much of the ammunitions and machines were all built by women who went into the factories in a time frame where it was, you know, like unlikely for them to even not be wearing dresses. So to put on overalls, go into a factory, and then be able to do what she did for her country, it was really the reason why we wanted to name the company after that
yes,
that woman, that era.
it's fitting so well, right?
Right. Yeah. And then it's really just like the business model too is a distributed manufacturing process. So
Yeah,
it's just kind of all ties together.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, so you started basically with just a few products, and then how did you expand? And so we're a manufacturing association in Florida. Florida makes. The podcast is named Make in Florida, but then so obviously there is some you manufacturing in Florida. So how did all because did you have connections to Florida
Yeah,
yourself?
so kind of a windy road. So we started in Georgia, and then my co-founder moved to North Carolina, and that's where we still have a retail store. And then we also had our manufacturing center there. And at that by that point, we had grown, opened a retail store, and we'd actually switched from military materials to materials that were really created with the military inspired. But that really came about because the military materials can sometimes be really dirty. They can be not like, very in a tight, places. And a lot of the feedback we got from our remote riveters was this is bulky. Like I don't really want it in my kitchen, which a lot of times that's where I'm working. I'm making these parts and pieces in my home with my children. And so that's when we decided let's buy new canvas that's easier for them to deal with. And so, really, for a lot of years, we were sending bulk materials to their houses, which is really difficult because we don't know how well they were efficiently cutting. So, some of you that are in manufacturing are probably thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is an inventory nightmare," and it really was. It was very difficult to know what our yields were. How it was expensive because we were sending full rolls of fabric to their houses,
I
and so
bet.
one of the first like very large steps in the right direction for us was moving to Florida, and we and the reason we moved to Florida was there was a sale of equipment that was up for sale, and we also had an opportunity to move to an economic development area, and to just get this very specialized cutting equipment. At the time, we were using simple sewing machines, just flat stitch, one type of sewing machine, which is very difficult to get into more difficult type assembly lines is when you have one type of machine. So we bought this machine, which allowed us to cut the material. And so if you think about a house, you really to be able to create a quality house is really the foundation that you put up. And that's also cutting for manufacturing and for handbag assembly. When they were hand cutting from home, nothing was consistent. One would cut it one way, and so it made it very difficult to have a quality product that was built from a strong foundation, which is the cut. So we started machine cutting the packets to go out to the military spouses, and it was just really revolutionary for us. That was a huge step. Was being able to lay out the patterns on on the cutting machine. Our yields went way up, and then the military spouses were way happier because they were getting a box of materials rather than a roll of fabric that was 50 pounds.
I bet. And was it get instructions of what to do, or like how
Yeah,
did they
and then
know?
yeah, so they're all relatively well versed in sewing. So they do a test kit when they first start with us and they know how to sew. And then we send specifications of like how wide the seams need to be and those kind of things because it needs to be consistent enough to be able to be put into the finished product. And then the pieces that are coming need to match it. So we're a lot of handbag manufacturers produce their handbags in a completely different way than us. And we're thinking about the assemblies coming together, whereas a lot of times handbags are created in a completely different order, probably a
I
lot
see.
more efficient order. So we have that whole dynamic. It's like a three-tiered chess game that sometimes we're playing, which is eventually what ended up getting us a little bit in trouble as far as inventory goes, and why Florida Makes was really a huge part for us. Was really coming in from an industry standard and really bringing in some major pieces of efficiency and
Yeah.
critical thinking that really revolutionized the way we were doing it. So I think it ended up working out really well because we had this kind of disruptive thought, and we weren't really encumbered by how I think manufacturers normally think. We thought if a problem came into it that direction, but then, you know, 10 years later to be able to bring in a true efficiency expert and say, why are
Yeah.
you doing it this way? And really doing that critical thinking of how can we make this more efficient for you? How can we make this so that you're more competitive? Because we're competing against people that buy everything from overseas. So
That's right.
already right there, we're at an extreme disadvantage because our consumers have been trained to think, well, I'm going out into the market and I'm buying this handbag that costs a fraction of the price of yours, but they have no idea how insanely expensive it is to make it here in the United States. So not only are we making it here in the United States, but we're also sending parts and pieces across the country to military spouses to be able to give them a job. So our handbags are even more expensive. So to be able to bring in an expert and look at our manufacturing model and really help us in that way was really a key time for us.
So I guess you made a good segue to Florida Makes, and I mean, I think it would be appropriate to talk a little about the whole thing, how we met, what happened, and things like that.
Yeah.
So before I tell my story, because obviously we met. I mean, we spoke on the phone for the very first time, our interaction. But before that, how did you find Florida Makes? How did you know who to call? Because you're also situated in an interesting area, which is Wachula,
Yeah.
and it's technically Hardy, right? Hardy
County in Wachula. Yep, that's where we
Hardy
live.
County, and Hardy County doesn't really have its own RMA, Regional Manufacturing Association. So
And
it,
you guys have to like
it was
attach
it
to
was
somebody,
interesting.
didn't you?
And Florida Makes didn't know who to assign you, so they just called me, which is good they did. But
Yeah.
how did you find Florida Makes? You just Google, search something,
Yeah,
or
we actually we had always had a accounting group that was outside of the state, and we had hired one within the state. And the beautiful thing about that was just local resources and being able to take advantage of your local area and how your community can come together and give you recommendations on what to do. So it was actually our fractional CFO that had mentioned like, hey, you guys should really apply for this.
okay, so it was a CFO then.
Yep. Yep.
And then I'm getting a call from headquarters. So you called headquarters.
Yep.
And then I'm getting a call from headquarters saying, look, there's a manufacturer here. It's in Wachula. Actually, at the time, I didn't even know where it was. So I Google. I'm like, okay, it's about an hour and a half. It's not that far.
Yeah.
And then I called you right away. Did I call the CFO or I called you? I can't remember.
I think that you might have talked to him very briefly and then very quickly because it
And
was
then we all jumped on the call. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were telling me the symptoms you were experiencing, which are so common
Yes.
into any manufacturer,
Yeah.
right?
Oh my gosh. Right. I could write a whole book on it now, I think. But yeah, we definitely did some of the very basic things that you probably should never do. But I because of the nature of the company, and I've never actually been in the facility. I've been moving. I moved 13 times. It was really important for me to be able to track everything we do. And I come from a data background, so one of the first things I did was mandate that they have to track everything that we do, and that way I can have a financial record of it. And the very intense bill of materials and all the labor that goes into it, and really that was the big part of making sure that we had that set up from the beginning. So we started, you can kind of see where this is going, send parts and pieces out to military spouses. So we started creating all these stages of WIP. And we're a fashion company, so things change very frequently and very quickly. So we were basically making mountains of WIP throughout our 13 years. And it
Lots
became a
of
massive
inventory.
problem for us. And we were tracking it all. We all knew where it was, but really
Lots of cash. Yep.
a lot of cash is spread out over that, and money, as you can or money of shipping and things that are just getting piled on top of this whip and whip. So that's when we could never come up with a reorder plan for our materials. It was very difficult to kind of come up with, well, how much material do we need to buy, because it's all across this whip stages. So we had reverse bill of materials. We like it got so complicated, and we bought so many programs to try and do this modeling of how much material do we need to buy, how far out do we need to buy it, how can we be more efficient with that. And the whip stages just caused so much problems with that over the years, that we eventually said enough is enough, we need some help. So I think that's when you came in.
Yeah, it's very common, and then it seems like the solution actually is rather simple, but many times we see
Yeah,
it's for some reason we're trying to think that it's really complicated, so we ourselves making it really complicated.
for sure.
So that's what happened. And as we're talking on the phone, I can already picture what's happening there.
For
So
sure. I mean, and it's from the outside, we went on Shark Tank in 2016, and grew tremendously during that time frame. And a lot of Shark Tank companies are not made in the United States; they're not handmade like we are. So I think that was one of our biggest fears, is if we go through this and we go through that learning or that growth curve, can we fulfill that many products, and how do we do that? But my husband did all these mock tanks with us. He was going through his MBA at the time and had a lot of resources. And so he did a lot of my mock tanks for me. And it's surprising that we're still married, because he was the worst shark I've ever went up against. He was brutal. But he always kept saying, "You need to stop making whip. You cannot make whip. Like, you've got to stop." And it would, and I mean, till this day, and we've gone through the program with you guys. And he's like, "I told you that." And I'm like, "Well, but you never came up with a solution of how to do that. It's the how can you actually do that?" And you're right. It
That's the
seems very
complicated part,
complicated.
right?
Yeah, but it's actually a very simple solution.
But
I
it's
think.
very simple.
Yes.
That's right.
So it's
That's
just
funny.
mind boggling to go to now be on the other side of it, and realize, kind of some of the solutions that we could have done over the years to really alleviate a lot
Yes.
of.
So who we brought you? We brought you basically a TOC expert, theory of constraints expert, who was actually himself. He was trained by Dr. Eli Goldratt. Eli Goldratt wrote the book The Goal, founder of theory of constraints. And one of the things Eli used to say, that in any complex system and complicated problem, there is inherent simplicity in it. And it's so true, because the solution is simple. The problem is to get to that solution. So tell us a little more about, okay, so how did we and Florida Makes, and obviously the association, how do you think we supported you? Or tell us the kind of the story of, okay, so we realized there is a problem. We contacted Florida Makes, then we obviously had a conversation, and we brought you a very experienced resource. But then uh, just tell us a little about the program, and how do you think it supported the business?
Yeah, so I think the first day came together, and I mean, just even in the first conversations, it was, you knew exactly what our problem was, could very eloquently explain it to me, and I'm like, yes, that's the problem. And we really, what it was very simple. Like, we just needed to create velocity throughout our manufacturing process. So basically said, if we couldn't finish it in 5 days, we weren't going to start it. It really needed to start, either be left in raw material or make it all the way through to a finished good. And that was a very important aspect of the buffer rope pull system that he was
So
implementing.
in 5 days, you mean from raw material to finished good?
Yep. So it was very
And
important.
where were you at the moment
I
before
think, like,
this?
I mean, we were ordering things 9 months out. And then when
Yeah.
it actually started a process, it could take upwards of each of those phases from actually cutting the first raw material. It would take 4 months before it actually became a finished good.
And
And
he
it happened.
this guy comes
Yeah.
with 5 days.
Yeah. And so, and when he was like, you're not going to be able to do it unless you finish it in 5 days. That's the part that we were like, you're just crazy. That's never going to work.
Yeah.
Um, but like, throughout the training and looking at the sprints throughout the manufacturing process that they went through, and figured out how to do that, we eventually have reached a point where we can really do that. And it's just so much of a healthier system, because things being kept in raw materials, especially for a fast-paced fashion type brand, what was really happening was, something would shift, where the market, my merchandising team, my marketing team wanted something else. And so that process of 4 months got stalled halfway through, and that whip stage just got put on a shelf somewhere, and it just stayed there. And then the new process would start because they wanted something else. And that happens hundreds and hundreds of times over. You eventually got all this whip on a shelf that's just tying up cash.
Yep.
So it was really revolutionary for us to be able to figure out, how can we do this? How can we start it and finish it and get it finished? So
Yep. And such high caliber consultant, uh, were you able to pay for the entire amount of the consultant, or I believe we provided some guidance on that as well.
yeah, so what kind of happened was through a process of reimbursements. So it's a great program to be able to get access to a much more senior person than we could ever afford, especially full time. So the grant was definitely just a massive part of us kind of recuperating
Yes,
and
yes, we
growing.
were able to qualify for the grant. That's right.
Yeah, for the grant. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah. So
So were you able to get to the 5 days then
yep,
after?
we're like very close. It's some of the processes of leather finishing are still, like, we ended up deciding that either those need to be purchased as a whip, or we would find that part could begin and be stocked to those parts if it did take longer than 5 days. So some of the leather processes, I mean, some of the things we're doing is literally etch painting 3 times, which is very expensive to do in the United States, and I think that not a lot of people realize how much work and dedication goes into high-end handcrafted leather handbags.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I also remember that it was pretty visual too. What I enjoyed seeing the transformation from what it was before, and then the visual management that was put in place that you can actually see where the flow is. That was incredible too.
I mean, then, yeah, prior to that, I think that our individuals, unless the manager was there, literally babysitting it, going through the process because it was work orders, hundreds of pieces of paper were being used to give them instructions to go out and do it. And that was very difficult because if the manager wasn't there, they didn't know what to do. So now we have a very visual workplace where it's a bin that moves throughout the system. It's very visual. They know, like, well, if this is stacking up, I know I need to pull it and get it into process. So not only are we more efficient, but our individuals know how to move throughout their day without direct management.
That's great. That's actually what I want to do. Visual management, good visual management. You need to know if the situation is normal or abnormal, and then if it's abnormal, what are we doing? Basically, are we red or green? And you should be able to you should be able to know it like immediately as soon as you step on the shop floor. And I think that's what was exactly what was implemented there,
Yep,
which
absolutely.
was fascinating. So what's next? What's next for our RRiveter then? What's the next? What's the future holds?
Yeah, well, future, I think now that we've gotten a lot of this figured out, we're able to open up into more sales channels. So being able to create more of the same product in a more efficient manner. So right now, predominantly we have our own e-commerce channel and a retail store, but we're able to get into Amazon. So that's next for us, and just being able to sell in a more efficient manner because we're able to know we can hit these production deadlines.
Yep.
So we're staying in Wanchula, and that building actually retrofitted a 100-year-old building for us. So it's kind of reminiscent of the World War II time frame, and it's great to be able to see a historic building every day. And not a lot of manufacturing locations have even windows in them, for obvious reasons like UV, especially in Florida, going through and hurting your products. So that's been something that we've kind of had to work through. But it's just a great environment for my employees because they've got bright windows that they work in every day, and it's not the traditional manufacturing process that you normally see. Especially for a lot of handbag companies that are just buying it from overseas, where their conditions for their employees are just so horrendous. But here we have a really sustainable model where we're not only creating opportunities for women, military spouses who normally uh, need a work from home opportunity. So that's a part of our model. But then also in Florida, being able to or help a completely different set of women. We've got two amazing individuals down in Florida who said that they were just crying in an interview saying, like, I've never been able to work in air conditioning. I've always worked out in the orange fields. And so I really wanted to learn a new skill for me and my family so that I could have a sustainable work where I can work for a company for life. And this is where I want to be. And so it's
Nice.
really cool to see another wave of being able to help a woman and a different woman in a different way than
That's awesome. No, that your story is really fascinating, and I'm just looking forward to what's next to come.
yeah. Well,
So I
thank
guess
you.
you're gonna.
Yeah, you've been a huge part of our growth. We really needed it at a time when we needed to bring in some real, true industry level professionals. And I think that's mixed with a grassroots story like ours, and it really
Absolutely.
a combination.
Yeah, yeah, we really love the story of RRiveter for sure. And yeah, that's what we are really all about. Sama, Florida makes. We are just here to support the local manufacturers and really grow manufacturing in Florida. That's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're all about that. To be able to keep jobs here in America. That's the entire reason why we started our Riveter too. Is my co-founder and I were so proud of our husbands for their service to our country, and we always, every day, being independent, as they were called, wanted to be able to do something to help our country too. So for that reason, just being part of our American economy, able to create jobs, keep it in Florida, it's a major part of the DNA of our river.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks for having me.